he was born in Bradford, and then he studied in London, and then he went to Los Angeles, attracted by a number of things, but primarily advertising of a magazine that he enjoyed looking at, which depicted muscle or muscular men, right? Hockney is gay, and he had been exposed to popular culture from the United States. And he decided to go to Los Angeles essentially to check this out, right? And to just look at the art scene over there. And the story goes that when he was on the plane arriving in LA, he saw from the plane all the pools that people in California have, or sometimes not necessarily private pools, but pools in general, and that he was very interested in that. And then eventually he came to meet people that were important, collectors, and had a chance to go to private pools and public pools, and that he became the painter of Los Angeles and the painter of pools. And this might seem really silly on some level, but it is essentially a cultural type of painting, right? Cultural in the sense that it reflects the culture of the place and the time. This emphasis on a kind of life of, or at least that is portrayed as a life of relaxation, of constantly being in the sun and being in a bathing suit and enjoying yourself in these buildings that are very horizontal, such as these ones, that emphasize again this sense of relaxation because of their horizontality and their large windows. And the pool is outside. So this particular painting became very famous very quickly, and it was really the great breakthrough for Hockney. It's called the Bigger Splash because he had painted another one which was called a Little Splash. And then he painted this one, which was larger, 94 by 94 inches. And so he called it a Bigger Splash. Now, that's the story that he tells. There are many interpretations for this particular title and this work. At any rate, what was Hockney exactly interested in when he painted this? He was interested in photographic effects, right? Again, like many of his contemporaries, he's interested in photography and in rendering a photographic effect through the work. And he was particularly intrigued by the instant that a photograph could reveal, right? So this instant of the splash, you are in front of a pool, the water is very calm. In the way it's painted here, it is entirely flat, so it is, ultimately immutable, not just calm, but completely calm. And the splash is a disturbance in the water and in everything, right? It's one can almost feel or hear in your mind the noise of somebody jumping into a pool from a trampoline and making a splash, right? There's a change in everything. Think about it. It's every sense is affected, right? It's the sound, it's the visual disturbance in the pool, it's the change of the temperature in your body, this sensation of a great surprise, right? So something that again is essentially a disturbance. It can be a happy disturbance because after all you're in a pool, but it can also be little bit of a shock. So there are many almost like philosophical questions being brought by this work and by again the notion of photography capturing this instant, right? The notion of the instant as opposed to this sense of, I wouldn't call it eternal, but long lasting pleasure of being by the pool, touched by the sun, and then all of a sudden that is disturbed. And there is potentially a sinister aspect to this in the sense of, again, disturbing this lifestyle, right? In which everything is calm, everything is peaceful, there is relaxation, comfort, and then all of a sudden, we have a situation that is disturbed by that, and it is suggested by the splash. So this painting, in a way, it has many layers of meaning. It can be simply an aesthetic pleasure, right? Like again, being by the pool on a sunny day, everything is pretty, everything is pleasurable, and then the painting evokes that. that aesthetic sensation, and the happy colors, right? It has all this essentially, on a very basic level, a pleasing appeal to it. But then again, it is also a cultural reference. California, pools, wealthy people, comfort, a life that is seemingly immutable. But so that's the cultural element or the context. But then again, a more philosophical question is about this disturbance of all of these pleasures, and the reference, or the rendering of that through a photographic reference. um, the painting, in addition, has a border, right? This It's actually painted on canvas, but this is raw canvas, right? So this is everything is painted, except the line above the pool right here, which is also left unpainted. But he hasn't put a frame onto it, and when you see it at a museum today, it's in the Tate. You see it with this border, right? So it's the canvas without a frame. That's how it's shown or exhibited, and it has this just raw canvas. So it has this look of a print almost, right? Of almost like a magazine print as well, like on paper. And if you look carefully, it's painted in a way where the edges of the painting, the edges of the square, are not entirely well lined up, or parallel to the edges of the canvas. So it really, again, it has this subtle disturbance to it, right? So there are all these little things about this painting, that everything looks perfect, everything looks smooth. The application of the paint is, again, especially the sky here has been applied with a roller. So we did not want to leave any traces of the brush, in order to create, again, this kind of flat texture that recalls advertising. Perhaps he wasn't necessarily thinking about advertising, but that's what the viewers end up connecting with that. And it looks like a magazine, like it looks like an image that you might find in an architecture or interior design magazine. Again, everything is perfect. There are no people. All right, I forgot about that. There's nobody there, so we don't know, who inhabits this house, who has just jumped in the pool. There are all these questions that the painting poses, that again make it look like, again, a picture perfect type of image, but with a small disturbance that might perhaps refer to the possibility of disturbance in the work. So let's compare this with some of the visual, not sources, obviously. Hockney isn't necessarily looking at any one of these photographs or ads, but the perception of the viewers of the time, who after all made um, the work well known, with images of pools, idealized images of pools. These are ads, well, photographs from ads. From hotel pools, right? So these are not private pools, but nevertheless, they give us an idea of how people perceived the pool to be. It's a cool place where we socialize in bathing suits. Therefore, there's an element of attraction in it. It's a sunny day. We're speaking of relaxation, of comfort, of essentially a kind of luxury, right? Of the 1960s. And before that, pools have existed for a long time, but really they become appealing and they become possible to achieve to more people during this time. So there's the glamour of the pool. And then the notion of, again, socializing, social life that you might develop in the pool. You get to meet cool people, attractive people, and you might, again, form some relationships with them. So the solitary pool is a whole other business, right? So, on the one hand, it's a reference to luxury. You have a private pool in your house, nobody disturbs you. You don't have to be thinking about meeting strangers. But then again, you're very alone, right? So, pools may be associated with socialization, with getting to know people, but Hockney's pools are always kind of lonely. We usually, if we see a swimmer, he did paint others, and I'll show you a few. Well, just one actually. he did paint other pools, but it's always one person or two people that are not really interacting, right? So there's an element of absence of life, or life that is gone or is not visible, right? So this sense again of something odd about this lifestyle, something that is not sinister but strange, right? That creates a sense of strangeness. Whereas these images again are all about happy people socializing. His works, they have this connotation of happiness, but then at the same time, there's something about them that is strange. All right. Another thing is that I forgot to mention this kind of buildings. So we have the horizontal building, but there's a building reflected on the window. And where is this building in the painting? Right? Who lives there? Where are there other houses with no neighbors or very few people that inhabited them? We don't know. So that is perhaps this element of relying on advertising, celebrating the culture of the 1960s, like the other two artists that we discussed, Rosenquist and Ruscha, but at the same time, adding an element of strangeness, of doubt to what is happening here, right? Is it always everything so good and cool about it? Um, of course, again, the reference to abstract expressionism, as I discussed with Rusha, might be present in there. Um, Supposedly, Hockney was not consciously reacting to abstract expressionism, but then again, his prior paintings, which I'm not showing you here, were far more expressionistic, were far more painterly. And so, when we look at the splash itself was methodically painted. He actually had looked at this photograph of a pool with a splash, not this one in particular, but perhaps one similar to it. And he was intrigued by the notion of the splash, and so he painted the splash in a meticulous way. Instead of saying, "Oh, I'm going to throw some paint," right? I'm going to paint this water very flatly, right, with the trampoline and the water and the cement. That's what probably is in there, or the tile. Everything will be smooth, but then this splash, I'm just going to throw some paint. Well, no, he did not do that. He actually very methodically painted the splash, right? And it took him a really long time. And so again, this was almost like commenting on how the camera instantaneously and very quickly, well, in an instant, captures the splash. But then again, it takes the painter such a long time, right? So this, on a basic level, he's thinking about that. But then again, if you think about Jackson Pollock here and many other abstract expressionists, they how do they paint? How do they make a splash? Well, they dump the paint. This is the drip technique, as we call it, right? Which creates brushwork that is spontaneous, that is instantaneous, also, and that happens very quickly, as again the photograph actually does show us. The Pollock here is dripping the paint, and well, this is happening rather quickly, right? He's actually moving around the work. He's kind of making a little dance. Well, Hockney is doing the total opposite. He's painting very methodically, looking at the photograph that he has, or the ad. Actually, it wasn't the photograph that he took, it was an ad that he found, and he is painting that in a very deliberate way and reflecting upon this spontaneity versus sort of frozen representation of the splash, as one might see in an image such as this one, which is again a frozen image that shows us a very spontaneous encounter. These people are laughing, right? They seem to be very happy. They are laughing. They are socializing. Everything is happening quickly, but then again, the image seems frozen, right? So perhaps this may not be the photograph or the ad that Hockney was looking at, but nevertheless, it might have been something similar to this one. And all the more, it gives us this impression of people, socialization, sound, laughter, as opposed to, again, this rather eerie representation of the splash that is, again, a frozen moment, especially reinforced by the fact that there seems to be complete stillness all around.